I rushed into the Monday morning meeting 5 minutes late, my heart pounding and apologies ready. I'd spent the entire night fixing Dean's presentation, the one he dumped on my desk at 6 p.m. with a casual reminder that the client meeting was first thing Monday. No sleep, just hours of correcting his sloppy data analysis and reformatting slides that looked like they'd been made by someone who'd never opened PowerPoint before. The conference room went silent when I walked in. 20 faces turned toward me, and Dean stopped mid-sentence. His expression shifted into something cold and calculated, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. What followed wasn't a simple acknowledgement of my lateness. It was a performance. Dean made a show of checking his watch, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then he launched into a brutal assessment of my professionalism, my reliability, my value to the team, called me the weak link in front of everyone, suggested maybe I wasn't cut out for the demands of this department. His voice carried that particular blend of disappointment and condescension that made every word feel like a slap. I stood there fighting back tears while my colleagues stared at their laptops, pretending to be very interested in their screens. Nobody defended me. Nobody pointed out that I'd been up all night fixing his mess. The humiliation burned through me like acid as Dean finally, magnanimously, allowed me to take my seat. I made it to the restroom before the tears came, locked myself in a stall and tried to remember how to breathe normally. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. 5 minutes late after staying up all night to save his presentation, and he destroyed me in front of the entire team. Mia found me there 10 minutes later. She was the closest thing I had to a friend in the office, though even that friendship had become strained under Dean's regime. She told me to let it go, that Dean humiliated everyone eventually. It was just his management style. If you tried to fight it, you only made things worse for yourself. But something had broken inside me during that meeting. Not my spirit exactly, but my willingness to keep absorbing abuse and calling it professional development. I'd given this company 3 years of exceptional work. Stayed late, volunteered for impossible projects, produced results that consistently exceeded expectations. And Dean had just reduced all of that to nothing because I'd been 5 minutes late while fixing his incompetent work. I washed my face and went back to my desk. By lunch I could hear the whispers starting, people discussing how I'd been late, how Dean had finally called me out, how maybe I was starting to slip under the pressure. The narrative was already being written, and I wasn't the one holding the pen. The rumors spread like poison over the next few days. Clara's slipping. Clara can't handle the workload. Clara's becoming unreliable. I'd overhear fragments of conversations that would stop abruptly when people noticed me. The story of my lateness had been transformed into evidence of broader professional decline. Dean fueled it with surgical precision. Emails that should have credited my work were rewritten as team efforts or his own achievements. In meetings, he'd reference ideas we developed. When discussing concepts I'd created entirely on my own, my contributions were being systematically erased and redistributed. A project I'd led for 2 months was suddenly described in Dean's status report as something he'd taken over after initial struggles with direction. My innovative approach to client retention became his strategic initiative in company-wide communications. Every achievement I'd built was being quietly reassigned while I watched helplessly. The most insidious part was how subtle it all was. Nothing dramatic enough to report to HR, just constant small erasures that collectively painted me as someone who'd never really accomplished much on her own. Dean was rewriting my professional history in real time, and the company was accepting his version without question. Then he stole the campaign, the big one I'd spent 3 weeks developing, a complete reimagining of our approach to millennial consumers. I'd researched demographics, analyzed competitor strategies, created mock-ups and projections, stayed late perfecting every detail because I believed this could define my career. I'd shared my progress with Dean in our one-on-ones because that's what you were supposed to do. Keep your manager informed, collaborate, be a team player. I'd walked him through the strategy, shown him the data, explained my reasoning. The following week, Dean presented my campaign to senior leadership. Every element, every insight, every creative approach, all of it presented as his strategic vision. My name wasn't mentioned once. When the VP of Marketing praised his innovative thinking, Dean accepted the compliment with false modesty, said something about always keeping his finger on the pulse of emerging markets. I found out from Mia, who'd been in the leadership meeting taking notes. She looked uncomfortable telling me, kept saying maybe there been a miscommunication, But we both knew what had happened. Dean had taken 3 weeks of my work and stamped his name on it like I'd never existed. The performance review was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I should have seen it coming, but I'd been naive enough to think Dean might show some basic human decency. Instead, he'd prepared a trap. He sat across from me in his office, my personnel file open on his desk, his expression grave with manufactured concern. He was worried about me, he said. The lateness had been concerning, but it was part of a larger pattern he'd been noticing. Emotional instability, difficulty handling pressure, questions about my judgment and reliability. He twisted everything. My late night fixing his presentation became evidence that I couldn't manage my time effectively. My frustration about stolen credit became proof I was struggling with team collaboration. Even my excellent work results were reframed. He'd had to provide significant guidance and correction to make my projects successful. The formal warning went into my file. Written documentation that I was underperforming, that my professionalism was questionable, that my continued employment depended on immediate improvement. He needed me to sign acknowledgement of the review. I signed with a shaking hand, understanding with perfect clarity that I was being set up for termination. Dean was building a case, creating a paper trail that would justify firing me while protecting himself from any consequences, and there was nothing I could do about it because he controlled the narrative completely. I left his office trembling, walked past coworkers who wouldn't meet my eyes, and sat at my desk wondering how my career had collapsed so completely in just 2 weeks. The office turned cold. People who used to chat with me at the coffee machine now offered tight smiles and hurried away. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone Dean was targeting. It was like watching myself become invisible while still physically present. Dean made jokes about me in meetings, never quite cruel enough to be called harassment, but sharp enough to draw nervous laughter. Comments about my attention to detail, questions about whether I'd checked my work, suggestions that maybe simpler projects would be more my speed, every jab designed to undermine my credibility while maintaining plausible deniability. I started eating lunch at my desk, avoiding the break room where I'd overhear conversations that would stop when I approached. The social isolation was its own form of punishment, making me question whether I was overreacting, whether this was just normal office dynamics I was too sensitive to handle. Mia still talked to me occasionally, but even she kept her distance in public. She'd send sympathetic texts but wouldn't sit with me in meetings. I understood she was protecting herself from becoming Dean's next target, but the loneliness was suffocating. The sabotage was so subtle I almost missed it. I'd prepared a comprehensive report for our biggest client, compiled over 2 weeks of careful analysis, uploaded it to the shared drive the night before the meeting, double-checked that everything was perfect. The next morning the file was gone, just vanished from the shared folder. I searched frantically, checked my email, looked through my local files, found the backup on my computer and tried to resend it, but the client meeting had already started. Dean appeared at my desk, his expression disappointed but not surprised. He told me he'd had to apologize to the client on my behalf, explained that I'd apparently forgotten to send the report. He'd done his best to summarize my findings from memory, but naturally it hadn't been as thorough as a proper document would have been. The client had seemed understanding, but Dean was concerned about the impression this created. I tried to explain that I had uploaded it, that it must have been deleted somehow. Dean looked at me with something like pity, said maybe the stress was getting to me, perhaps I should take a few days off to regroup, get my head together before things got worse. It later confirmed the file had been deleted at 6:47 a.m. I'd uploaded it at 11:30 p.m. and left the office at midnight. Someone with access to the shared drive had removed it before the meeting, but proving who had done it was impossible. I started documenting everything. Not for revenge, I hadn't reached that point yet, just for self-preservation. Every email saved with timestamps, every project logged with detailed notes about my contributions, screenshots of my work before sharing it with Dean, backup files stored in multiple locations. I tracked Dean's edits to my documents, noting when he added his name and removed mine, documented his public criticisms with detailed notes about context and witnesses, created a timeline showing how my performance reviews had shifted from excellent to concerning immediately after I'd been late that one time. Nobody knew I was building this record. I worked on it late at night, methodically cataloguing months of systematic undermining. If Dean was building a case against me, I was building one of my own, though I had no idea what I'd do with it since HR clearly sided with management over employees. The documentation became a kind of anchor, proof that I wasn't crazy, that the gaslighting was real, that my achievements had existed before Dean erased them. Some nights it was the only thing keeping me sane. Mia pulled me aside one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd overheard Dean talking to HR about me, called me replaceable, said he was documenting performance issues to support a termination recommendation. HR had laughed it off, saying Dean was tough but he delivered results. The casual cruelty of it broke something in me. I wasn't even a person to them, just a problem to be managed out of the organization. Dean's results justified any abuse, any theft, any destruction of someone's career. And HR's job was apparently to enable him rather than protect employees. That night I seriously considered quitting. Drafted a resignation email at 2 a.m., my finger hovering over send. It would be so easy to just walk away, find another job, start over somewhere that didn't make me feel worthless. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe just the fundamental injustice of letting Dean win by forcing me out after stealing my work and destroying my reputation. I deleted the resignation email and went to bed with a grim determination to survive at least long enough to figure out what came next. The email from Victoria Chen, our senior executive VP, came as a complete surprise. She noticed my work on the quarterly analysis, apparently one of the few projects Dean hadn't managed to fully claim credit for, and wanted my input on the company's biggest upcoming pitch, a major prospective client worth millions in annual revenue. High visibility, high stakes, exactly the kind of project that could define careers. I responded professionally, trying not to sound too desperate or grateful. Victoria set up a meeting for the following week to discuss strategy. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Mia was excited when I told her. This could be my way back, she said. If Victoria Chen was personally requesting me, Dean couldn't completely sideline me. Maybe this was the break I needed to rebuild my reputation. I spent the weekend preparing, developing initial concepts, researching the prospective client's industry and needs. Created 3 different strategic approaches, each backed by solid data and creative thinking. This pitch could save my career. I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. But Monday morning, Dean called a team meeting to announce he'd be leading the pitch team. Victoria had requested his leadership given the project's importance. My name was mentioned briefly as one of several team members who'd provide support. The hope I'd felt for 3 days evaporated instantly. Of course Dean had stepped in. Of course he'd position himself to take credit for whatever success came from this pitch. That's what he always did. Dean took complete control of the pitch development. My strategic concepts were absorbed into his drafts with my name carefully erased. The innovative approaches I'd developed became his vision in every document, every email, every meeting. I watched it happen in real time. My market analysis reframed as his insights. My creative positioning presented as his strategic thinking. Even specific phrases I'd written appeared in his materials, word for word with no attribution. The team meetings became showcases for Dean's brilliance. He'd present my ideas as if they'd spontaneously occurred to him, sometimes still rough because he'd literally just stolen them hours before. Everyone would nod along appreciatively, praising his innovative thinking while I sat there silently documenting every theft. Victoria checked in once via email, asking if I was getting valuable exposure on the project. I responded professionally that it was a great learning experience. What else could I say? That Dean was stealing everything. HR had already made clear whose side they were on. The rehearsal was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Full team present, Victoria attending to evaluate our readiness before the real pitch next week. Dean had been in preparation mode for days, rehearsing in his office, perfecting the delivery of my stolen work. I'd seen the presentation deck he planned to use. Every slide was mine, my analysis, my strategy, my creative concepts. But my name appeared nowhere. The title slide credited Dean as lead strategist. The closing slide thanked the team generically without mentioning specific contributions. The rehearsal started well. Dean was polished, confident, hitting all the right notes. The strategy was solid because I'd built it to be solid. Then he got to the competitive analysis section and decided to improvise some additional insights that weren't in the prepared materials. Big mistake. He clearly didn't understand the underlying research well enough to go off script, started making claims that contradicted the data in previous slides, suggested approaches that didn't align with the overall strategy. Victoria's expression shifted from engaged to skeptical. Then Dean made it worse by trying to recover with humor, made a joke at my expense, something about how even Clara's occasionally solid research sometimes needed his interpretation to make it useful. The room offered uncomfortable laughter. I sat there absorbing another public humiliation while he tried to use me as a punchline to cover his incompetence. That night I almost quit again. Sat in my dark apartment seriously considering whether any career was worth this level of abuse and theft. I'd built something good, a comprehensive, innovative pitch strategy that could win a major client, and Dean was going to butcher it with his surface-level understanding while taking full credit. Then I pulled up my documentation, months of carefully recorded evidence, every stolen idea, every erased contribution, every piece of my work that Dean had claimed, timestamps proving when I'd created everything, emails showing my original concepts before Dean corrupted them. I'd built this entire pitch, every element of strategy, every data point, every creative approach. It was mine in ways that went beyond just professional pride. This represented hundreds of hours of my thinking, my research, my innovation. Dean could present it, but he'd never really own it. He didn't understand it deeply enough, didn't grasp the connections between elements, couldn't defend the reasoning because he hadn't done the reasoning. Something cold and focused crystallized in my chest. Fine, let him present my work, but I'd make sure that when it mattered most, the truth would be impossible to ignore. I went into the office the next morning with new purpose, stopped showing emotion when Dean took credit, stopped reacting to his barbs and dismissals, became quiet, efficient, almost invisible, let him think I'd been completely broken. Meanwhile, I kept perfecting the presentation, but only in my private files. The version on the shared drive remained the corrupted one Dean had been working from, full of his sloppy additions and misunderstandings, but my original, pristine version was safely stored in multiple locations he couldn't access. I added something new to my private version: metadata, digital watermarks, timestamps that would be visible when the file was opened, creator information embedded in ways that couldn't be easily removed, every slide tagged with my name in the file properties. Dean was so confident he didn't notice the subtle differences between versions. He downloaded what he thought was the final deck from the shared drive and was rehearsing from that. Never occurred to him to check the metadata or verify the source files. I kept my head down, did the grunt work he assigned, let him believe I accepted my diminished role, all while quietly ensuring that my original work was documented in ways that would survive his attempts at erasure. The week before the pitch, I noticed Dean had downloaded the file from my shared folder, not the corrupted team version he'd been working from. He must have wanted the original, cleaner version of the strategy, which meant he was now working from a file that contained all my embedded metadata and creator information. He had no idea. Dean's tech literacy was minimal. He could barely work PowerPoint beyond basic slides. The concept that files contained hidden information about their creation history was completely foreign to him. I watched him rehearse with my metadata-embedded file, using the presentation that was digitally tagged with my name in dozens of invisible ways. He was polished, confident, ready for his big moment, ready to present my work as the capstone achievement of his career. Perfect, let him feel confident, let him believe he'd won completely. The bigger his sense of triumph, the more devastating his fall would be. The final week was tense. Dean was in full preparation mode, treating the pitch like his coronation. He ran through the presentation constantly, memorizing my strategic points without actually understanding them, practiced his delivery in the conference room, projecting confidence and vision. I sat in on the rehearsals silently, watching him perform with my work. He'd gotten smoother, more polished. The team was impressed. Victoria sent an email saying she was feeling very positive about our chances. Dean forwarded her email to the team with his own addition. Looking forward to bringing this win home for us. The implication clear: this was his win, his achievement, his moment of glory. Mia caught my eye during one rehearsal, her expression sympathetic. She knew whose work this really was, but like everyone else, she wasn't going to say anything. Speaking up would just make her Dean's next target. Thursday brought last-minute panic. Dean decided the presentation needed additional slides to really impress the prospective client, and Victoria wanted more data, more graphics, more flash. He tried to add elements himself and created a mess, slides that didn't match the overall design, data that contradicted earlier points, graphics that looked unprofessional. He was making my work worse with his additions, but his ego wouldn't let him admit he needed help, just kept layering on more sloppy elements. Convinced that more was always better, the presentation was becoming a hybrid of my professional, strategic work and his incompetent additions. I said nothing, let him corrupt it. The messier his additions, the more obvious the quality difference would be between my original work and his contributions. Let him hang himself with his own inadequacy. Friday afternoon, I made a realization that changed everything. Dean was still running the old draft from the shared drive, the one with all my metadata embedded. He'd apparently decided his last-minute additions weren't working and reverted to my original file. Which meant when he opened that presentation on the big screen next week, in front of Victoria and the prospective client and half the company's leadership, all my creator information would be visible. File properties showing my name, metadata proving I'd created it, timestamps confirming the dates. I hadn't even planned this perfectly. Dean had done it to himself by being too incompetent to create his own version properly. He was going to present my work from a file that was digitally signed with my name in ways he didn't understand existed. I went home that night feeling something like calm for the first time in months. I wasn't doing anything to Dean, he was doing it to himself. The night before the pitch, Dean sent a company-wide email about the big presentation. Thanked the team for their support, with special recognition for minor contributions from various team members including Clara. The email dripped with condescension, making clear this was his achievement with some trivial assistance from lesser employees. I read it sitting at my kitchen table at 11 p.m., and instead of feeling angry or humiliated, I felt nothing, just cold anticipation. Tomorrow Dean would present my work while standing next to digital proof that he'd stolen every element, and everyone who mattered would see it happen in real time. I stayed up finishing my own backup documentation, made sure every original file was accessible, every timestamp verified, every piece of evidence organized. If questions came, when questions came, I'd be ready to provide irrefutable proof of ownership. Then I went to bed and actually slept, first full night's sleep I'd had in months. The boardroom was impressive. Massive presentation screen, executive seating for 20, camera setup for recording the pitch. The prospective client's team sat on one side, CEO, CFO and their marketing director. Victoria and other company executives sat on the other. Dean's team, including me, filled the back rows. Dean stood at the front looking confident and relaxed. He dressed for the occasion, expensive suit, perfect grooming, the image of successful leadership. Spent 15 minutes before the presentation started networking with executives, laughing at jokes, playing the role of rising star. I sat in the back row, laptop open, watching him perform. Mia was beside me, nervous energy radiating off her. She whispered good luck. I nodded but didn't respond. Luck was what this was about. Victoria called the meeting to order. Dean stepped up to the presentation computer, projecting confidence. He opened the file, my file, tagged with my name in metadata he couldn't see. The title slide appeared on the massive screen, crisp and professional. Strategic Market Entry Analysis. Dean smiled at his audience and began to pitch my work as his vision, and I sat perfectly still, waiting for slide 12. The presentation started smoothly. Dean had memorized the content well enough to sound knowledgeable. The strategy was solid because I'd built it to be solid. The prospective client was nodding along, engaged with the analysis. Victoria looked pleased. The other executives seemed impressed. Dean was hitting every mark, delivering my strategic insights with practiced confidence. For 20 minutes it looked like he was going to pull off the perfect theft. Then he advanced to slide 12, the competitive analysis section, and the autofooter I'd embedded activated. Large text at the bottom of the slide, impossible to miss on the giant screen, created by Clara Hughes. File creation date, March 3rd. Dean's confident delivery stuttered. He glanced at the screen, saw the footer, and his expression shifted from confident to confused, tried to keep talking while clicking to the next slide, but every subsequent slide carried the same footer. My name, creation dates proving I'd built this weeks before Dean had claimed to be working on it. The room noticed. Victoria's attention shifted from Dean's words to the footer information. Other executives were leaning forward, reading the text. The prospective client's CEO pointed it out to his team. Dean tried to keep going, but the damage was accelerating. He clicked through faster, trying to get past the damning footers, but movement only made it more obvious, slide after slide carrying my name, my creation dates, proof of my ownership. He stumbled over words he'd delivered smoothly in rehearsal, started saying and ah. His confidence was evaporating in real time as the audience stopped paying attention to content and started focusing on the footer information that contradicted everything about his claimed authorship. Then someone, I think it was Victoria, said the words that ended it. "Clara, is this your work?" The room went silent. All eyes turned to me in the back row. Dean froze at the front, his face cycling through expressions, panic, anger, calculation. He was trying to figure out how to salvage this, but there was no salvage available. I stood up, my voice steady, confirmed that yes, I'd created the entire strategic analysis, developed it over 3 weeks starting in early March, all the research, all the insights, all the competitive positioning, mine. Dean tried to interrupt, to explain this away as some kind of technical error or misunderstanding, but Victoria held up a hand to silence him. HR was called. It was summoned to verify the file metadata, and Dean stood at the front of the room watching his stolen triumph collapse into the most public humiliation possible. The IT verification took 10 minutes. They confirmed the file properties showed me as original creator, checked the timestamps against company server logs, pulled up previous versions proving I'd developed the entire presentation over multiple drafts spanning 3 weeks. Dean tried to claim it was collaborative work, that he'd provided strategic direction, but it showed that every edit, every contribution, every development was under my user account. Dean had literally only opened the file the previous week, adding a few sloppy slides before reverting to my original. The prospective client's CEO stood up, said he appreciated our time but felt uncomfortable moving forward given the obvious internal issues. He and his team left, taking with them the multi-million-dollar opportunity Dean had destroyed. Victoria's expression was cold fury. She asked Dean to step outside with her and HR. He tried to argue, to explain, to deflect, but security was already being called, and I sat in the back row watching him get escorted out of his career-defining moment by the consequences of his own theft and incompetence. The room cleared slowly after Dean was removed. Executives filed out in stunned silence. Mia grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. Other co-workers were looking at me with something between respect and fear. Victoria stayed behind. She apologized for not catching Dean's behavior sooner, said she'd been reviewing my personnel file and saw the disturbing shift in performance reviews that coincided with Dean's targeting of me. It would be conducting a full audit of my work versus his claimed contributions over the past 2 years. She asked if I'd be interested in presenting the pitch myself to the prospective client. They'd agreed to a follow-up meeting after she'd called and explained what happened, this time with proper attribution and no Dean involved. I said yes, not because I was vindictive, but because the strategy was good and deserved a fair presentation. 6 weeks later, I stood in my new office, the one that used to be Dean's. We won the client with my properly attributed pitch. Victoria had offered me Dean's former position, restructured to focus on strategic development rather than people management. The company had conducted an audit and found dozens of instances where Dean had stolen credit for others' work. Mine was just the most dramatic because I'd documented everything. Several other employees came forward after my exposure, sharing their own stories of theft and abuse. Dean was gone, terminated for cause with the prospect of legal action if he tried to work in the industry again using stolen materials. I didn't gloat about his fall, didn't celebrate the destruction of his career, just showed up to work every day, did excellent strategic work, and built something legitimate under my own name. Some days I'd pass the conference room where he'd first humiliated me for being 5 minutes late. The memory had lost its power to hurt. Now it just reminded me that patience, documentation, and truth were more powerful than any amount of confidence built on lies. I'd been 5 minutes late once after staying up all night to fix his work. He'd used that to justify months of abuse and theft. And in the end, his arrogance had made him careless enough to present my stolen work from a file I'd tagged with irrefutable proof of ownership. The best revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just making sure that eventually, inevitably, the truth came out in the most devastating way possible. And sometimes all that required was patience, and letting an arrogant man destroy himself with his own incompetence.